And welcome back to another episode of Debt Nation, where we are busy putting death out of business. And I've got Alexander here all the way from Moscow, and we're going to cross over to him to talk about venture capital. But before we do, let's thank our sponsors. That's Thrivous. You know the deal, $5 all the way up to $160. You can get yourself some free Thrivous if you share the link around. So make sure you do that and you get free geoprotectors and nootropics. Also, thanks to Dave Kelly, I Am Transhuman, for sponsoring this episode. Alexander, it's good to have you on the show. I've heard a lot about you. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks a lot, Steele. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, fantastic. No, yeah. And how's the weather there in Moscow at the moment?
Well, it's pretty sunny. It's been snowing for the past few days, but the snow clears up quite quick because now it's April. So nobody expects the cold weather to persist for a long time now.
Yeah, it's coming to springtime, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're going into winter down here, so but that's good for you guys. You deserve it. That's long, cold winters over there, so you deserve it. And anyway, cool. And I love your name, by the way. Powerful name. Our sponsor as well has a son. His name's Alexander. I really love that name. It's a strong name. All across, all the Alexanders across history, whether that's Alexander the Great or some great Russian leaders, many great people have been called Alexander. So we've got another strong name here. I really endorse that.
I like your name as well. We had a guy by that surname, actually. You might have heard of him. But yeah, pretty powerful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. My name's an interesting name, unique name. It's good for marketing, if nothing else. So that's good. All right. Well, let's talk venture capital. All right. I'm new to venture capital. I've never heard of venture capital before. Let's go from the very beginning. What is VC?
Well, venture capital is investing in companies that are quite young and helping them to grow from very small idea stage startups to the bigger guys who are about to do an IPO. So normally it's about investing in tech because only tech companies can grow really quickly to become big. While if we talk about other means of investment like private equity, it's mainly dealing with classical businesses like real estate or manufacturing or others. But actually, venture capital, private equity, investment banking, consulting, they're all interlinked because no startup can become a big company by just itself.
Yeah, and So what is the risk tolerance of someone who let's start. There's two sides of venture capital. There's the business side, the entrepreneur who wants money, and there's the investor. What's the psychology of the two different sides? So let's start with the investor. What's the risk tolerance? What is the investor's psychology? What are they looking for? What type of ideas? You mentioned tech is something that's hot right now. Is that always been true?
Well, tech is a very big field. There are lots of different sectors within the tech sector, and they all have the different risk tolerance levels. For example, guys who invest in biotech, they have really big risk tolerance parameters because it takes a very long time for a startup having an innovative technology in the pharmaceutical or biotech space to actually become successful. And because it's dealing with health, it has to go through all kinds of approval, specifications, animal, human testing, and all those kind of things. And only then it becomes successful. But if it goes through all those kinds of approvals, then it's going to be really big and it's going to make the investors a lot of money. So what the venture capital funds in biotech do, they always have, even at the very early level, like associates, they have guys with PhDs in like molecular biology, in quantum chemistry, and all those kind of things, because they have to know what's hot today, what's hot tomorrow, and try and find the good startups for that kind of investment focus. But going to your question as to what kind of things do investors look out for, well, it really depends on the stage, right? So if it's quite an early stage, then the company doesn't have any financials yet, it doesn't have many clients, and it might not even have a working product. So the means of valuation are very qualitative rather than quantitative. And to invest in the stage is far more risky. So when venture capitalists think whether or not to invest, they look at things like, I don't know, the strength of the team, how long have they worked together, do they have any great experts and significant background in this field. They have a look at the innovation and competitiveness of the product and its ability to defend against what's already on the market. They also look at the growth and the existing size of the market as well, because if the market is small, even if the startup is really cool and the team is great, then it's not going to be a very big investment opportunity, because when you work in venture capital, you invest, well, if it's a seed stage fund, then you would invest for maybe the next 4 to 5 to 6 years to come. And the longer you try and predict those time horizons, the more difficult it becomes. So it's also the riskier, right? So you need to pick only those opportunities that can give you like at least 10 times return on your initial investment. While if you go toward the later stages, the return can be less, like for example, 3x or 4x, but it's still going to be significant because by that stage, the startups no longer really startups in the sense that they're quite big. They already generate revenues, and as a result, even one significant investment that a company makes is going to be a very lucrative opportunity if the startup goes to an IPO, for example. But there are lots of different venture capital funds. Some of them invest only in one particular stage and have an expertise here. Others can afford to go evergreen. So they pick up a startup, for example, at an idea stage, and then they can follow on at different stages until the startup goes to an IPO. But for a traditional venture capital fund, it's quite rare to be able to wait until an IPO, because there are different kinds of competencies needed. Because, for example, at early stages, you normally have to do with business development, you have to do with helping the startup to achieve an initial traction. At growth stage, it's normally about helping the startup to go international, to turn one product into a line of products, to get significant corporate clients and stuff like that. And afterwards, it's mainly to do with investment bankers and similar guys.
So you can see it works. It works up the tier there, and you know. So what's the psychology? Before I get to the big question, what's the psychology of the entrepreneur side? What's the psychology of the entrepreneur? They've got an idea. They're out there. They've got something, a device, a product. Maybe it's just an idea, or they've got a team. At what stage should they start chasing venture capital money and trying to sell equity in their company? At what stage? From the very beginning, or should they have a device, or what stage? A patent, or does it depend?
Well, talking about patents, for example, in England or in the United States, patents are very difficult and expensive to obtain for early stage startups. So sometimes they leave the obtaining of such patents until maybe Series A. And before that, they just do some provisional patents to show that they have the technology. Another problem with patents is that if you file a patent at the authorities, then some bigger guys like grown-up startups or corporations can spot that because they have dedicated teams to look out for that. And then they can just copy your idea by circumventing it, right? So what many startups, especially in deep tech sector in the US do, is they go in stealth mode, right? So they try and avoid all kinds of public attention. They try and avoid publicizing news. They try and avoid even having a developed website, because it will give too much away about their technology and about what kind of competitive advantage they have. And only after they've secured the next round of financing, only after they have some corporate clients which you can grow out of, then they would become more of a public startup. And when we talk about entrepreneurs, really the question of whether or not they should raise financing depends on their own experience. Maybe if they had prior successful startup experience before, they already have the network, they already have an understanding of how to grow from small stage to bigger stage startups. Then really at earlier stages, the money that they've secured through selling their previous startups would be enough to fund them. But even in those cases, additional external money would still be necessary when it comes to increasing the pace of your growth, when it comes to going international, because there are only 24 hours in a day, and a single founder or even a team of founders cannot hope to accomplish everything by just themselves. So normally, the earliest funding that a startup can have is his own money. Then he would go to the so-called triple F round. So it's friends, family, and funds, or friends, family, and fools, as some call it, right? So it's normally the guys who invest at the highest risk. They give quite small sums of money, but at the stage that they give this money, there isn't really as much need for large pools of money, so it's not that important. And after that, really, the source of money which the entrepreneur tries to obtain depends on his own needs once again, and on his own ability to scale a startup. Because if he doesn't know much, then he might want to go to an accelerator or incubator where some entrepreneurs will be taught basic things like, I don't know, how to attract additional team members, how to develop your minimum viable product, how to generate initial market traction, and similar things. And there are a lot of different accelerators. A lot of them have diverse programs, but really, when it comes to the US, for example, I would only advise either going to some kind of industry-specific accelerator, like, for example, once again, biotech, because in the biotech accelerator, you would be able to secure contracts and advisors from the specific field that you're working in, which would be far more relevant than if an accelerator tried to comb all kinds of different startups, for example, from biotech, from fintech, and all the other fields onto one specific kind of line. And also, if you go to biotech accelerator, you'd be able to generate far more publicity in that specific field. And if you don't want to go to a sector-specific accelerator, I would advise you to go to Y Combinator, just because it's the biggest one out there and it has the greatest reputation, right? So there are a lot of companies who became successful when they were initially funded by Y Combinator, and even though it's adjusting a lot of the current processes, mainly it's going online, and I don't really know as to how successful it's going to be. Because a lot of the value from Y Combinator is in networking, and like, how can you network effectively via Zoom or via Skype? I'm not that sure, but still, it's one of the best ones out here. So, I mean, why not? Especially since it does give you the brand name, and it does give you an opportunity to raise from the top tier venture capital funds at demo day. So after you pass the accelerator stage, it's normally an opportunity to go to seed stage funds, and those funds, once again, they look at qualitative aspects rather than quantitative, because there are no financials to look out for. And actually, before the seed stage funds, normally, even before accelerators or at the stage of accelerators, you can also go to guys called the angel investors, who are individuals from tech field. Maybe they've worked for a long time in Microsoft, maybe they worked for a long time in some kind of automotive industry, and they're really passionate about trying to support the young entrepreneurs in that particular field. They can give them some kind of a small check. They can give them an opportunity to utilize a network of contacts. And it's also quite helpful for earlier stage startups, because it does help them to accelerate their initial traction. So after you pass the stage of seed stage, venture capital funds, then you would go to growth stage. And it's normally the guys who invest from Series A onwards. And at that stage, sometimes there is traction in terms of commercialization. Sometimes there is not. But often case, you would still want to judge a startup's performance based on its unit economics and other metrics, like, for example, lifetime value. So how much a particular client gives in terms of money to the startup over the whole lifetime of using this product. Or another metric often case used is customer acquisition cost. So how much it costs for the startup to acquire a specific client. But to be honest, there are lots of different startup metrics, and normally they depend on the industry in which a startup is in. For example, biotech has one metric, marketplaces have another, right? And after that, after growth stage venture capital funds, it's normally moving on to private equity firms who normally invest on quantitative means. Normally they invest in very grown-up businesses, and typically they don't really invest as much in tech as they invest in traditional businesses, like, once again, manufacturing or real estate, just because the business models are far more predictable, and as a result, they're less risky, right? And because the private equity firms, they invest much larger sums of money, and they draw up their returns not from massive increase in capitalization over the short run, but over dividends. Because normally private equity firms, they invest large sums of money, and in return for that sums of money, they try and get large stakes in the company return. So as a result, they get big dividends. And private equity firms normally can afford to wait until an IPO, where they can make a killing on the public market. And at an IPO, before an IPO stage or at M&A stage, also guys like consultants or investment bankers get involved to help this former startup to become an increasingly attractive acquisition target. So normally, the way venture capital funds exit is through a sale to a private equity firm, through a sale to a large corporation, through an M&A, or if they can afford to go evergreen, then they can wait until an IPO. But as this is a classical venture capital funds, there are also guys who are corporate venture capital funds. And unlike the classical funds, they don't really care as much about the financial returns, although over the past 4 to 5 years, they have increasingly begun to look out for them as well. But mainly they care about the technology, the innovation that this particular startup can bring to their mother corporation. Because normally the returns that this mother corporation brings are significantly higher than any kind of financial return an investment in startup can bring. But a lot of the operational processes within this corporation, for example, if it's a car manufacturing corporation, if it's an oil and gas corporation, a lot of its processes are quite outdated. And there are a lot of startups who try to disrupt the space. So if there are even minute percentage increases in operational efficiency, then over the long run, in terms of the wider environment of that corporation, it can bring many millions, if not billions, worth of savings, which is really cool as well for the corporate venture capital funds.
That is one of the most succinct and fluid explanations of the venture capital process that I've ever heard, and I thank you very much for that. That's very comprehensive, very, very well done. I guess a lot of people know, a lot of the public knows their venture capital ideas from a very famous TV show. Well done, Shark Tank on TV. So, just to explain to people, what is the definition? What's the definitional difference? What's the difference between an incubator and an accelerator? What do each of these guys do? What does an incubator do, and what does an accelerator do?
Okay, well, an incubator is a stage earlier as an accelerator, right? So its purpose is to nurture, to incubate the startups. Mainly the entrepreneurs go to an incubator when they just had an idea, right? So they want to know how to bring it forward. They have this idea, maybe they know how to technically implement it, but they don't know how to market it. They don't have any additional employees, maybe programmers to write code or something. And this is what an incubator helps with, right? So it's a very initial market validation to develop an MVP and similar things.
And so
An
when you see
accelerator,
on Shark Tank, and some of these incubators have taken control of equity, is that a good entrepreneur, a bad one, or it's impossible to tell like every scenario?
well, I think the Shark Tank is not an incubator. It's mainly a panel of business
No,
angels,
no, I
right? So
mean
they all have it.
if the billionaires on the show are asking about the equity stake, for example, and someone says they have a product there, it juices apples or something, and they say, "Oh yes," and our incubator took 10%. Does that happen? Are they smart? Are they stupid?
Well, it depends, like if you see the value in this kind of program, the incubator program, then sure. But normally you should not give away too much equity at a very early stage because you would dilute your cap table. So cap table is a list of investors whom you already have in your startup other than just yourself as an equity holder. And if you have too complicated a cap table, firstly, it would increase the time that you would have to spend on reporting whenever something significant in your startup happens. And at the early stages, there are a lot of new developments every day or every week. So you would spend a lot of time, waste a lot of time on that. Also, in countries like, for example, Eastern Europe, a problem with diluting your cap table in that regard is that there are a lot of undesirable investors who can maybe offer you some kind of smart money in the short run, but they don't have any contacts or expertise on the international markets. And when you look at political risks, when you look at economic risks, when you look at some dealings, some previous investments of certain individuals, you would maybe be wary of raising from them because over the long run, when it comes to fundraising for your next round from more reputable investors, for example, in Silicon Valley, they're gonna judge you for that, let's say. So it might be more difficult for you to fundraise. And the best in those cases that this particular investor can hope for is to be bought out by the later stage investor at 1x the return, right? So 1x return is definitely not the venture capital return because, as you mentioned yourself, it's the most risky one. So it's not, maybe they should have just put it in the bank or bought stocks or something. While if this investor refuses to relinquish its stake, then an even bigger problem happens, right? So the startup might not even be able to fundraise the next round. So if the startup is not able to fundraise the next round, it dies out, and the investor doesn't get 1x the return, it loses out on all of its returns and the initial investment, right? So the choice is bleak. But another problem I think with major markets like Latin America or Eastern Europe, or to the lesser and lesser extent Southeast Asia, is that a lot of investors at incubator stage, at accelerator stage, they try to twist the hands of an entrepreneur and try and make him relinquish as much equity as possible at an early stage, right? So, for example, in Eastern Europe, it goes to cases where at an accelerator stage, guys give away maybe 80% of equity, which is crazy, I think, because for an investor, like from my own perspective, for an investor, it's a very bad position to be in because the less equity the entrepreneur has, the less interest he has in the long run development of his own startup, right? And as an early stage investor, especially if you have a portfolio of investments, and you cannot really afford to spend a lot of time developing them. You're mainly here to provide some contacts. You're mainly here to give financing. You're mainly here for the investment role rather than the operating role. So the main public face and the main operator is the founding team. And if they don't have any interest in growth and development of the startup, then you would lose out as well over the long run. So why? Why would you want to do it? I don't know. But some people try and prioritize short runs. I think that's another case with emerging markets.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they're trying to flip their own company somehow, or like, and as if you go down the road, and you find out this on Shark Tank, for example, if you're talking about Shark Tank, which is an entertainment version of what we're talking about, with real money and real stakes. If I was one of those billionaires sitting there and I was analyzing these guys and they said, "Oh, by the way, I sold off 80%," then what faith have you in yourself, in your team, and what faith have you got in your own capital? It doesn't make sense. It's someone who wants to jump out. Then you would have been better just to merge with another company or sell it off completely at 100%. Why would you even have equity at that point unless you were going to work as a slave to this new equity holder? I don't get that at all. 80%, it's ridiculous. Anyway, but that's a good point. What's so what do they call smart money? There's a definition that floats around. It's called smart money and dumb money. Is VC smart money? Is it dumb money? Or is it variable depending on circumstances?
Well, it's variable depending on circumstances because, as I've mentioned to you, there are different kinds of venture capital funds. The corporate venture capital funds are normally considered to be dumb money because the only thing that they bring in most cases is just financing, right? But in some cases, if the investment is
they do a lot of like dollar cost averaging sort of investments, right? It's just generic. It's dollar cost averaging. They throw it in there, and they put it into more stable returns, right? They would rather put it into bonds, but when they do go this way, this is what you're laying out as what they do, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about corporate venture capital funds, they're also called dumb money because really, in comparison to the M&A budget that they have, which are in the billions, the maybe average size of the venture capital fund as a whole is around 100 million in the US in terms of corporate venture capital fund. So as you can see, as this 100 million is divided into many investments, and some of them are first-time investments, some of them are follow-ons, maybe around 50% are follow-ons. So really, you can afford to pump as much money as possible into a particular startup because, yes, the initial size of the corporate venture capital fund is small, but it pales in comparison to M&A, right? So if it's a necessity, then the manager of the venture capital fund can approve from a corporation a lot more money, and it can drown the startup in money, right? And this is a case maybe to a lesser extent in some with guys like SoftBank, which are very well known, especially in Silicon Valley, with pumping up the valuations around of startups into the billions, right? And often case, those startups just don't deserve it because yes, the initial investments of SoftBank were really successful, but others, as you can see from the news, like for example, WeWork, which is constantly agonizing.
I was going to ask you about WeWork. That was in my list.
Yeah, we can talk about it later. But basically, previously, it used to be the case that the startup couldn't really afford to say no to SoftBank because if you say no to SoftBank $1 billion round, then SoftBank will go and back your competitor, right? And over the long run, sure, it's all about the competitive advantage, the technology, and what the customer thinks of you. But over the short run, and that's where the $1 billion round comes in from SoftBank, you can still spend far more on marketing. You can still spend far more on trying to facilitate international expansion. And sometimes it's all that's necessary to really push your startup forward. So that's why corporate venture capital funds are considered dumb money because really they can afford to put a lot more money than a traditional VC into a particular investment. And often case, they just care about, strategic fit rather than how successful the startup would be. That's why at earlier stages, it's not a good idea if your startup gets a lead investment from a corporate venture capital fund, because then it gives a signal to the market to the traditional classical venture capital funds that maybe there is not as much investment upside on that, because if a corporate venture capital fund led the round, it means that it gave the most money from the desired amount of money. It got the most stake, and it is the one that helps the startup to generate the syndicate. It helps the startup with the largest volume of contracts and similar things. So it's basically playing the leading role. While if a traditional VC leads the round, then obviously there is significant investment upside. And that's why it sort of gives a bigger signal to the market. But still, it's great to have corporate VCs in the round, because they give a lot of things which a traditional VC cannot. For example, once again, access to its mother corporation, which can give pilots, which can give contracts, which can give significant validation. Because, for example, if you, as a small startup, have a contract with Microsoft or with Mitsubishi or even with SoftBank, then it definitely shows that there is significant innovation. Because otherwise, the guys at the corporation who sit here and look at which startup to invest in, they're not stupid at all, and they know what's going to be hot tomorrow. So if they use you instead of your competition, if they back you with $1, then there's definitely something in you. So when you talk about startup fundraising, it's definitely about the combination. Okay, so that's about corporate venture capital funds as dumb money. Some traditional VCs can also be dumb money, but it really depends on their investment focus and on the investors, so the limited partners that they do have, right? So, for example, if the guys who gave this VC fund their money from sources which do not really fit within its investment focus. So, for example, this particular venture capital fund invests in biotech, but most of its investors are in financial technology space, right? Leaving aside the fact as to why this financial technology guys would back a biotech fund, normally a problem with that is they don't really have enough smart money or expertise to advise this VC as to how to bring a particular case forward, how to provide it with additional smart money. That's why they can be considered dumb money. But it also depends on the sort of the ability of those limited partners to influence the investment decision process within the VC. Because often case, they gave the VC their money, and they say that, yes, we expect a certain kind of return, but we're not going to interfere with the investment decision-making process. All we can do is just sit on your investment committee and have an observer's role rather than have a decision-making role. So they cannot say no to a specific investment. And in those cases, really the ability to influence the decision-making is very limited. They can just advise. So in those cases, they can also be considered dumb money.
Yeah, that's incredible. And do you think sometimes that cross-pollination between, you used the example there, the finance guys and the biotech guys, it sometimes works, right? Sometimes this is a match made in heaven, but obviously it's classified as dumb money because the investing class in this scenario doesn't have that expertise to really wade into that biotech world and say, I know exactly what is going on here. I know that piece of equipment that they're using is $50,000, etc. But really, it could be they could be taking them for a ride. But sometimes it works, right? Maybe they're looking at microchip, with cashless communication, and so the finance guys and the biotech guys need each other for this cashless chip, and that's a scenario that would still be dumb money, but that might be a match that might work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially in cases where specific technology can be applicable to many different sectors with just minimal adjustment. Like, for example, artificial intelligence, right? So, for example, it can be used in financial technology when it comes to predicting the growth and return on specific stocks, or trying to assess what kind of creditors would pay out and what kind of would go bankrupt. Or it can be used in automotive space when it comes to sort of building a smart car or a smart home kind of device, right? And if a startup can try and use one specific technology for different sectors, it's going to be very lucrative for the venture capital funds that backs it. But in order to back it and understand that this particular startup would grow big, you need to have expertise, in that case, both in the autonomous car space and in the financial technology space. But if we look at things like, for example, artificial intelligence, an interesting thing about it is that artificial intelligence is AI only in America, while, for example, in Eastern Europe or like Latin America, most of AI companies, they don't even have it. They just say that they have it in order to raise a larger round of financing. Or they put AI in cases where it's not even necessary, right? So just to show that, yes, we have it. And for example, in regions like Southeast Asia, sometimes because of cheap and plentiful availability of engineers and coders in those regions, for them, it's far easier and cheaper to get 100 guys in the room to act as AI rather than get a proper AI algorithm. So yeah, it's kind of curious, but
Sorry, no, you're completely correct. And like one of the things about Chinese AI, the rise of Chinese AI, especially low quality AI, say facial recognition and stuff like that, is done because of the low labor input. They've got thousands of low skilled workers running around taking photos of everything and inputting that data in a manual way to teach the AI how to do stuff, and that accelerates their return on AI, even though that's not a real AI investment, so to speak, as you do get higher productive AI investments, return on investments in, say, Silicon Valley, which you're used to. Speaking of the AI race, we'll move on to coronavirus in just a sec, but speaking of the AI race, how is AI changing VC? Is it helping with the financial side, reading the financial reports and doing different analysis, or is that still up to people? Because a lot of this is intuitive, a lot of it's about human psychology, about who they're putting their money with, or is AI assisting in the VC funding world?
Well, once again, it really depends on the stage, right? So the later the stage, the more it's about the financials. And the more it's about the financials, the easier they are to plot on paper and try and get like a quantitative response from an AI algorithm, which can predict what's going to happen tomorrow or in a few years' time based on a budget or like a DCF model. While on earlier stages, it's normally about the qualitative things. So they are about your gut feeling, right? And yes, you can use AI algorithms still, but they're not going to be as effective. And normally, at this stage, they would be used mainly for generating new sources of startups, because a venture capitalist, it draws its startups from many different sources, like his own network, guys who write to him on email, when he goes to conferences, when he writes articles, when he networks with accelerators, for example, to see what kind of startups do they bring forward. And talking about the efficiency and effectiveness of those methods, let's say that the least effective method is when the startups write to me on my email, on my website. And this is because normally startups, they don't really do proper research as to what the investment focus of a specific venture capital fund is, in terms of its geography, in terms of its stage, and in terms of its segments. So for example, if I am a deep tech VC who invests in quantum computing, AI, robotics, new materials, and a guy in biotech or in fintech writes to me, even if I like him as a person, even if I see some value in his idea, I'm not going to have enough smart money to really help him out. and I'm not going to really be able to conduct proper due diligence on him if I want to make my investment. So it's going to be a subpar investment for me. And I don't want to make subpar investments as a VC because, as we know, it's all very risky, right? So the best thing I can do in that kind of case, if I really like the guy, if I know him personally, but his idea doesn't suit me, if I can recommend him to some other biotech VC that I know. But a problem with that, if a biotech VC asks me like, okay, you like the guy, why do you recommend him to me? Like, did you already invest in him? And if I say no, which I did not invest in him, then my recommendation is not going to be very valuable because like I can make the advice, but if I don't have my own skin on the line, then this advice is not going to be very applicable. So that's a problem with this kind of means of reaching out. And the most effective means of reaching out is once again through my network, right? If I know some guy who is brought forward to me through my friends, I know these friends for a very long time and I trust them to bring me good startups. Because if they don't bring me good startups, then in return, I'm not going to listen to their advice in the future, or worse, I can deliver to some subpar startups as well. So it's going to be wasting everyone's time. And we only have 24 hours in a day. And even if we sleep, some kind of new startup is fundraising in its next round in South Africa. Some kind of corporation is showcasing its new technology in Singapore. And in Silicon Valley, they keep developing new robots. In Eastern Europe, some kind of government is making new measures. So you always have to sort of keep your eye on the markets, even more so than if you are a trader, right? So you cannot afford to lose time in that regard.
Wow, that's the first time I ever heard anyone say that they have to do more work than a trader. The traders work hard; they're all over the news, so that's big news. Hey, how has the venture capital and startup industry changed since the coronavirus? There's lots of new emerging challenges and emerging opportunities. How has it changed, and how will we see it maybe post or during this crisis and coming on the other side of it?
Well, talking about startups, firstly, I guess there are startups who feel really badly, like guys in travel tech, as you know, because nobody really even goes out of the house as much, yet alone to travel to Guatemala from US or go on a hiking trip to the Chinese Wall. So it's very problematic for them because over the past year or so, they mainly try to differentiate themselves by offering trips to exotic destinations with locals and similar things. Now they can adjust to a certain extent by offering something more hyper local, right? So, for example, if you are in Silicon Valley, offer a trip to Napa Valley, which is a winemaking region in California, rather than go once again to Chinese Wall. But it's still not going to be as lucrative, right? Other guys who feel really badly are folks in the hospitality industry. So things to do with catering, things to do with hotels and similar things, because nobody tries to use them as much. And yes, they can adjust, but mainly they are feeling really badly at the moment still. I am not that sure that this is going to be a long run impact as to these startups are going to feel really bad over the long run, because once the coronavirus panic subsides, once people start going out again, they will try to catch up on what they have missed out on. And since they sit indoors, the main thing that they've lost out on is travel, right? So the startups will feel good once again. Now they just need to adjust their business models and try to survive past the worst of it. Still, there are startups who are really excelling at this time, namely, these are the businesses who used to be traditional businesses in the physical space. Now they're going online. Things like legal services, HR services, even eating out at restaurants or going to the shops. Now you can order delivery or order from restaurants' dark kitchen, right? So for the food to be delivered directly to you. Other things which I feel are really on the rise at the moment are things to do with mental health, because since you sit indoors, since you all you see is your cat and your family for many days in a row, your mental health isn't going to be as great as it used to be. Also things to do with online dating and others, right? So to sort of give your life a semblance of normal life while you are really restricted in what you can do, visit, and eat. So these are definitely on the rise, and yeah, and I think that really when it comes to startup fundraising, it really depends on what kind of situation your startup was in prior to the coronavirus situation. Because if you are a big unicorn, if you are a startup with at least $1 billion valuation, the likelihood is you already have sufficient resources in the bank to help you survive past the worst of it. Yes, you would be affected because you would need to maybe slow down your rate of growth. Yes, you may need to delay your expansion from one region to another because it's a very long and painstaking process, but you're going to survive past the worst of it. If you are a startup who managed to fundraise maybe over the past 5 or 6 months beforehand, then you'd still be in the green zone, right? So yes, you would still have some troubles. Yes, you would need to adjust your business model and maybe even raise your next round earlier than expected to help you survive. But the likelihood is you're not going to die out. The worst case scenario is for the early stage startups, right? So the guys who are in the pre-seed to seed stage, the guys who, as you mentioned, are dealt with by incubators, accelerators, and guys like the Shark Tank. Because at this stage, they don't have any revenues that they can draw upon from their clients. And even if they do, the likelihood is those revenues are diminished. And they don't have a developed team and enough market validation to successfully compete against the other startups in the market. And even in the very smallest niche, there are many competitors, right? So you always have to think about what your competitors are doing. So for those kind of cases, the likelihood is you're going to feel very badly. And the only thing that you can do to survive is to try to become as lean as possible, right? So cut your burn rate, so the amount of money that you spend on your team, even maybe sell off some of your non-essential or even essential inventories, because yes, it's going to hurt you in the long run. But if your goal is survival, if your goal is surviving the next half a year, then it might help you out. So if you cut your burn rate, then it's going to help you to extend your runway, right? So the runway is the amount of months you can survive before going bankrupt. And that's how to do it. And yeah,
So
that's
so
if I
that,
talk
that
about
makes
startups.
yeah, that's really interesting. And if somebody out there who wants to take advantage of this current crisis, I mean, I just looked at the news on the flashed up here on the TV, 750,000 in the negative for non-farm payrolls, and over 6.6 million in the US unemployed now, the largest in American history. And Europe is now calling for a new Marshall Plan, so lots of fiscal spending coming out. There's got to be opportunities in here. If you're an entrepreneur and you've got a small business that's riding on the back of some of these new advances, like for example, Uber comes to mind as something that it was a donkey for a long time. It was not going to do very well. They had too much debt on their books, but they may have just survived this, and they may come out of this stronger than ever. But that was very lucky on their behalf, because they weren't looking strong for a good long while there. But what should your pie chart be in terms of your spread? So how much debt should a startup carry? How much credit? How much cash? Should they be investing in things other than their human capital, other than their team? Should they be buying bonds or stocks in their portfolio? What's a healthy portfolio look like at an early stage? 1, 2, 3 years. And how does the portfolio change over time? How much money? What should these guys be spending on? Should they They can't obviously put it all in one basket, but how much cash, for example, should they be carrying on their books or debt?
Well, First of all, startups, they're not investors, right? So they don't invest in things like stocks or bonds. They don't trade on the stock market. The only things that they get is debt from a bank, or they try and get some cash from investors in return for equity, or they can get cash from their operations if they already have revenues, or they can get cash from government institutions or think tanks if they have some kind of innovative technology which can be applicable for grants. But definitely they don't spend on the stock markets. And mainly the things that they invest in, as you say, or the things that they spend on are firstly growing their team, also to facilitate international expansion. If let's maybe differentiate by stage, right? So if it's an early stage startup, it grows its team, it develops its initial market validation. For that, it needs a minimal viable product. If it's a hardware startup like a robotics kind of company, then its minimum viable product is going to be quite expensive. It also needs some patents. At early stages, patents are very expensive and seldom to obtain. So normally it's from Series A onwards. After that, when the startup grows, the money that it spends is going to be spent on marketing. So expanding the initial market validation that it already has to reach new markets, to reach new kind of customer demographics, as well as to secure additional corporate clients if it's a B2B kind of startup.
How important is marketing for a startup? There's a big argument here. Some people say marketing is everything, and other people say your device should sell itself, or your team or your product should sell itself. I mean, how much should these startups be spending on marketing? It's all. I know every answer I ask you is variable because it depends on each company and each situation. I know that.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I mean, marketing is definitely really important, but it's more important for things which are not really as easy to differentiate. Like, for example, in this current business situation, many people are trying to sell masks or sanitizers, right? Which are the same. Really, if it's a 3PLY mask, it's a 3PLY mask. So you don't really spend a lot if you have an attractive price and if you know whom to sell to. But otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for you. And it's going to be very difficult for you to expand without marketing if you are in a new kind of niche market, right? So, for example, in quantum computing, right? Because only in the past few years, the capacities of computers have become sufficient enough to justify applications in manufacturing, in financial sector, in other sectors. And before that, I mean, the quantum computing industry by itself, it's not new, it's been around since the 2000s. But for most of its history, it's been mainly applicable like only to the theoretical, to the academic space. And yes, academicians published papers, but other than guys like Rigetti, for example, nobody tried to dare make new innovations. And from venture capital funds, nobody really tried to invest. And actually, at the moment, quantum computing represents a very good investment opportunity for VCs, in my own opinion, because there are not as many quantum computing startups out there who are worth their salt. So you, as a VC, if you go around the whole market and maybe there are 3 to 5 startups which are really worth something, you talk to them all, you see whom is the best fit for your kind of fund, whom you can trust in terms of the VC to entrepreneur kind of relationship, and you back him with your money, then you can make a pretty safe bet that maybe 1 or 2 startups in quantum computing space would become unicorns in the next 4 to 5 years to come, which is very lucrative because most VCs, they try to chase for unicorns, even though unicorns are still seldom to come by, regardless of whether or not they are on the public radar.
Wow.
So, I mean, once again, the answer is it depends, but marketing is always very important. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, and I interrupted you in your portfolio flow. You were up to stage 3, or
Sorry.
your portfolio examination? How much, what a startup should have on a portfolio at any given time?
Yeah, I mean, really, the later the startup gets,
The more cash
mm,
they should
the
what
more.
type of role does debt have to play in a startup? Should an early
Yeah, I mean,
startup or a mid tier startup take a lot of debt on? I mean, I know we live at a zero interest rate
okay,
time.
okay.
Is that a great time to get a lot of debt?
I think that really for an early stage startup, it's not very attractive to go to the bank at all to secure like bank debt because it's going to be very expensive for him, right? That's why early stage folks they go to friends, family, and fools, or they try and secure angel financing or seed stage financing because yes, they give away equity, which is maybe not as lucrative over the long run. But let's be honest, like okay,
Survivability
let's
trumps.
say that you give away 10% of equity at seed stage, so you have 90% of equity left as an entrepreneur. So 90% of 100 million is far better than 90% of 1 million, right? And if you get an investor who is once again smart money, who doesn't only give you the money but also helps you to grow your startup, then this startup can grow from an idea to a big company far more likely than if you just go to the bank or if you just go to friends, family, and fools to get your money.
Yeah, you know,
So at the later stages, debt becomes increasingly attractive because it becomes cheaper, and also there is not as much equity to give away anymore. So you would still, as an entrepreneur, you would want to maintain your upside because many entrepreneurs they still want to last until an IPO, even though in some cases, like from Series B onwards, many investors of later rounds they try to replace the original entrepreneur as a CEO with another CEO because they feel that the original entrepreneur may be a visionary. Yes, he's a public figure. Yes, he developed the business from the seed stage to a bigger stage, but he is not as effective when it comes to facilitating international expansion, when it comes to generating really large scale relationships and at later stages, it's very important. So at later stages, the original entrepreneur might be replaced, and he's still going to be the public figure. He's still going to be an equity holder. He still might be the president, the nominal president, right? But he's not going to be the CEO who makes the daily decisions within the former startup, who is now a bigger company.
yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. So medical technologies are advancing in this coronavirus time. MedTech, as they called. What's up with MedTech? How do you see it with VC? Has the investment in MedTech crashed, or is it going up, or is it remaining stable?
Well, once again, there are different kinds of medtech, right? There are robots who do teleworking instead of doctors. There are startups who provide prosthetics for your limbs. But since the coronavirus outbreak has begun, a lot of attention from VCs is primarily on the field of developing novel cures, on once again teleworking, so helping doctors to provide advice or maybe even some kind of operations from home. And I think that this kind of investments and innovations will persist in the future because, to be honest with you, yes, coronavirus is bad, but it's nothing new, right? Because previously there used to be swine flu, previously there used to be bird flu, measles, Spanish flu, bubonic plague, Justinian's plague, whatever. So, like, the humanity is gonna keep dying. And yes, it's bad, but we are living in an age where there are significant innovations in the medical technology space. And now investors are moving away from traditional businesses like, once again, travel tech, hospitality, and other fields towards the businesses which can help them to live past the worst of this crisis and even generate more significant returns over the long run. Because the big problem now is that humanity was not prepared, as people say, right, for this coronavirus outbreak. So if it will be more prepared for the next one, then the startups who deliver innovative technology in the space and thus the VCs who back them with their money and get equity stake in those startups, they're going to make a killing, right? So investment will only accelerate.
Because government psychology is changing towards preventative policies, which means that even while the public will forget, because the public will go on to talk about the soccer and the football and everything else as per normal one day, the governments in the back of their head, they will still always be preparing, so the money will keep flowing for these new investments, which means that the psychology of the governments has changed, which means this is a safe bet. This is as safe as houses, as they say. Not saying the housing market is anything, but you know the saying, right? So, this is great. And what do you see what else? What other macro economic news do you have on the VC front going forward from here? China, Singapore, they've had different approaches to coronavirus. Now, look, China is starting to wake up again. Wuhan seems to be struggling out, but the Chinese economy seems to be reviving. What do you see post this crisis? Because being at the center of the VC world, you're used to hyper global connectivity. You're used to flying everywhere. You're used to seeing money zip past borders. But we're going into a different world now, where everything will be a little bit more regionalized, more localized, a little bit more in the way of preparedness, and maybe some of the more. Some of the stranger investments might be going away in favorable, more conservative investments. What do you see on a macro scale? Do you see the nature of startups changing? What do you see?
Well, I think that the stranger investments would never go away, right? Like, for example, you mentioned Shark Tank in the beginning. As you mentioned, a lot of startups that go in here are mainly for entertainment value, right? So even those startups who gave away 80% of equity in the very beginning, maybe they're only over here so the others can laugh at them and say, look, you are a fool, you give away so much equity, right? How you can succeed. But like we as a VC, we mainly specialize on frontier tech, right? So these are things like robotics, AI, new materials. So we get a lot of crazy ideas pitched to us every day. And I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, like even if you consider the macroeconomic environment,
I was talking to Dr. Manu about this as well, because I'm very interested in critical materials, new materials as you're calling them, which is probably, what is this definition of new materials? Is it raw? Is it commodities, or is it something else? Are you talking about fabrics, like bulletproof fabrics, or are you talking about processed materials? What are you talking about when you say new materials?
Well, it's normally the novel means to produce the old materials, like, for example, hydrogen peroxide, right, which is used for many applications in biotech, in manufacturing, in clean energy, or, for example, to do with 3D printing, right? So, for example, we have a company in our portfolio who have a technology for the 3D printing of buildings out of novel materials, and they're growing really quite well at the moment. So they're one of the ones I would call in the new material space.
Okay, I understand.
But going back to your original question in terms of the macroeconomic environment, I think that crazy ideas would persist. But let's say, like before, travel tech startups were really hot. Everyone wanted to invest in them. Now, a travel tech startup would be considered a crazy idea, right? Because the sector by itself is on the down. Nobody wants to invest in it. So if some kind of guy from Thrivous tech startup wanted to pitch to me, maybe his idea would be somewhat more crazy than the things that would be on the rise now. But going to the macroeconomic environment, as you mentioned, countries like China and Singapore now are recovering. And I think that this is quite curious because this is where coronavirus has initially begun, right? And like nobody knows whether somebody ate a bat or whether somebody contacted it from a pangolin or something. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that the Chinese government, based on its current political system, it's able to be far more effective when it comes to ensuring that its citizens are maintaining quarantine, that they are doing whatever it's necessary to prevent the spread of coronavirus or even to be curing it from their own bodies, right? While in the US, if the government goes and says like you have to stay at home, you cannot travel, you cannot like visit your aunt who lives in the nearest town, people are gonna go crazy. And if this kind of behavior persists over the long run, people are gonna stock up on bullets, people are gonna stock up on toilet paper, and they're gonna prepare for the next apocalypse. And in the US, there are a lot of people who do that anyway. So, like in Russia at the moment, the situation is kind of twofold because from one perspective, the government closed the borders. It instituted a quarantine period where everyone is not even able to go outside without a specific reason. But from another, people still go out like to buy food without masks. People still go out to stock up on buckwheat and everything. And there are many people who still go to work, especially in the critical industries, like, for example, medicine, delivery services, or agriculture, for example, right? Because especially in Russia, which is a very agrarian economy still, people still need to grow sugar, people still need to bake bread, because without bread, nobody will be able to eat anything. So those kind of industries are critical for the maintenance of the regime. So the people would still have to go to work, even though President has recently said that people have to stay at home. So if there are guys who don't work from home, they are on paid leave, which is very bad news for small and medium enterprises in Russia, because they cannot really afford to keep paying salaries without really any work being done. For us as VCs, situation is different because, as you mentioned, like a lot of work is done through travel, and from some perspective, it can be quite glamorous, right? So, for example, today is San Francisco. In a couple of days, it's Singapore. In the next week, it's London. But when you spend a lot of time on the plane or on the train, like you don't know by which time zone you live in, often case you're underslept, especially if you, like me, you haven't really learned how to sleep on a plane properly. And as a result, whenever you go to meetings, you are not often feeling well, but still, like in daytime, it's meetings, a lot of meetings, but in evenings or on weekends, you can still relax. You can go on Riverside in like Tokyo. You can try different street food in Singapore. You can, go in a red convertible in the valley. So it's quite cool. But now a lot of work is done not through travel in the time of coronavirus, but via Zoom, which is for me actually is quite efficient because now I don't have to travel around the city to different restaurants to meet with startup founders and other VCs. I can just, sit at home, get a cup of coffee and relax with my cat, which is fun.
Nice.
But yeah.
What's your cat's name?
doesn't really have a name because when I was getting it, I was getting it as a present, but now it lives with me, and I didn't really want to get attached to it as much. But a good point in that it doesn't have a name is that everyone who ever visits me, it gives the cat its own name. Like there has been like I don't know, Snowball, Fluffy, Maurice, and a few others. So it's like sort of helps the cat to be more attached to this particular person. But my cat, it's like a woman. So whenever you try to, well, it's a girl cat anyway. So whenever you try and grab it, it runs away and it scratches you. But if you try and ignore it for a few minutes, then it jumps on your lap and like says to you in terms of meowing, like, "Why have you forsaken me, human? Please stroke me," or something. So yeah, it's quite a cute cat. It's
Right.
Russian too, so it's like a gray cat with blue eyes. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. It's very cool. No. Yeah. It's very interesting. So that's really cool. That sounds like there is lots of opportunities in this coronavirus era. There's definitely a growing amount of opportunities, and I think as well, the nature of the startups will change as the psychology shifts and changes. So it'd be interesting to see, if there's going to be more money in frontier technologies. I think so. I think more money in virtualization, more money in frontier technologies, more money in everything digital. Digitalization is future proofing, I think. But also behind that, I think there'll be a lot of money pumped into securing the digitalization. So secure servers, VPN companies, the privacy tech companies are going to explode. I like that your portfolio has molecular 3D printing in there. That's a solid one. That's the future for sure. Governments are going to be investing in a lot of those sorts of things. I think the whole patent industry is going to go through a revolution. So I will be expecting a lot of innovations in the patent industry as well. So this is good stuff. It's really, really good. There was a question that I wanted to ask you, but I've forgotten it now. But yeah, all right, cool. Well, I want to thank you for coming on, Alexander. This has been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot about startups, a lot about venture capital. If I was on Shark Tank, pitching something, and one of those billionaires, just any of them, offered me something, I tell you what, almost regardless, unless depending on how confident I was, I would probably, it'd be very hard to say no, because even just having that person in your own personal portfolio, is almost worth any equity loss on your company, unless you have a multi-billion-dollar industry or company that's going to supersede these people. I mean, even then, because the people, when people watch Shark Tank, for example, they don't realize all the amount of backward calculations that are going through those billionaires' heads: capital, financing, marketing. What do they already own? Because sometimes they want to buy. They don't want to even buy the product. They want to buy the people. That team. They want to buy that team and absorb them. Or there's so many different calculations going on in that head when those offers spit out for that equity. It's quite an incredible experience, and when they start circling, I know these are investors, but when they start circling, it's always riveting stuff. It's always really exciting. So, it's one of my favorite shows. But to get to that point, you need to learn. If you're an entrepreneur, they need to learn about this stuff. They need to learn about the steps of the VC, from startup to IPO. They need to learn all these different steps, and I guess on top of that, have a great idea. Have a really, really solid idea. Something that Uber. Uber is a great idea because it's decentralized. Everybody else does the work. It involves everybody who gets in it gets richer. You know, the driver gets richer. The person who acquires the service, gets a great service at a lower cost than with the taxis, dealing with taxis, and it's decentralized, which means it's usually quicker. The Uber company, they get to hire people and innovate in the digital world. Everybody, it's a company that sort of enriches people from its theory. It's not the best well-run company. It might hold in there and survive now, but that is a beautiful idea. I've always loved the decentralization mechanism found within Uber. Actually, one company I wanted to ask you about, if you think that it will survive, if you're familiar with it, as a sort of a final question, is Afterpay. Do you know Afterpay? If you know Afterpay, what do you think the prospects for Afterpay are?
Well, to be honest with you, I think at the moment, they are going to do increasingly well because at the moment the service is increasingly demanded. But once the coronavirus panic subsides, they're not the only ones in the market, right? So they will need to continue developing their competitive advantage. And right now, I wouldn't say that they are in the best position over the long run because they have a lot of trouble internally when it comes to financing. They don't really have such a stable cap table of investors. And by what I know internally of their strategy, it could do far better in terms of international expansion, especially in the developing Asian regions, which are really a dream for most startups in the US because they have a lot of customers who are able to pay increasingly well, but most of those startups, they don't know how to sell to Asian consumers, be they B2C or B2B. So time will show, to be honest.
Well, what do you think? What do you think of the future of casinos, by the way? So do you think casinos as a physical form are going to continue, or do you think there's going to be a new brand of startups that, because you see this with the apps, right, on the App Store, do you think that somehow the App Store will have to evolve to allow real money in and allow digital casinos to sort of rise up and actual real money transfer in a real casino way instead of just always on the, do you think the digital casinos are going to go digital?
Well, I think that you don't really need an app store to play online with real money, right? Because, for example, if you want to play poker, there are things like PokerStars. There are a lot of digital casinos. They are normally located in convenient legal jurisdictions to be able to circumvent it all. I think that the physical casinos would still persist, though, because for some people, playing casino is about the experience, and you just don't get the same experience online.
But that's what I mean. Do you think they're going to have to rejig the laws so that they don't have to do all this offshoring stuff? Because I agree with you. I mean, I'm looking at casinos here in Australia, and probably worldwide. I mean, they've crashed. The stock is down over half of some very lucrative businesses right now. But I'm looking at their I'm looking at their development. I'm looking at the companies they're linked to, the development companies that work on the digital side, and they've doubled. I mean, they've doubled. Some of them have tripled in their stock has tripled because they're working on the digitalization of those casinos. They're putting the money over into that innovation. So, do you think the governments are going to rejig the law so that I understand the whole argument about, but we live in a post-corona world now where, maybe people will feel unsettled at sitting around a poker table, or they don't want to click the buttons on the machines anymore, on those pokey machines, because of the virus. I mean, I get that, but at the same time, maybe if it's on the App Store, people think this is a more sanitary way to get rid of their money.
If you think it's a more sanitary way, you should see how much dirt and bacteria is normally on the keyboard, right? It's often case even more than on a toilet seat. But really, once again, I think that once the post-corona world hits, many people would try and experience the activities which they couldn't have done while sitting at home. So now they're playing online. Tomorrow, in the post-corona world, they will go physically. And when you talk about specific countries, I think it really depends on how conservative the country is. For example, in cases like Monaco, like Macau, there are physical casinos that would persist. In cases where there are not as many physical casinos, maybe it will be more attractive. But really, I don't think it will be a quick period of time before the big countries, like, for example, the US, would implement digital casinos, because for them, it's a lot of issues to do with public perception, a lot of Wisec kind of things, right? So the policymakers wouldn't really want to risk at all when it comes to their reputation. That's why I was quite surprised when things like cannabis popped up in many states, and now there are a lot of venture capital funds specializing only in investments in cannabis techs, and those guys make a killing, right? So definitely there are opportunities to be had, like there are opportunities to be had with blockchain. But blockchain, in the mind of a traditional VC investor, it's associated a lot with scams, with ICOs, with hype, with Bitcoin going up and down because Bitcoin itself is on blockchain. But really, what most people don't know is that blockchain itself, it can be applicable to many other industries as well, like, for example, fintech, manufacturing, industry, and it can disrupt them as well. Like myself, I don't really believe in blockchain investments, but I have a lot of friends who not only gained a lot through the ups and downs of Bitcoin, but they work in blockchain investment industry. So they help the startups to accelerate at the earlier stages. They help them to grow big at later stages, and they know how it's done. They have the contact and they have the expertise. So if you do have the smart money, then you can really make a difference. If you don't have the smart money, then maybe you should not bother, because you'll be another dead investor in the cap table, which is not good for you. And it's not good for the startup who you try and fund.
Yeah, that's why it's called Blockchain God, Bitcoin Jesus, because it's the technology. It's the technology. It's not just the crypto side of it, which is what people confuse it with. They confuse the two terms and they get it all mixed up. It's an educational deficit, and maybe they should have renamed it something else. Alex, you've been fantastic, and thank you so much for coming on. The markets are crazy right now. It's very interesting. I know you're not completely connected with the markets in VC world, but it's going to have an impact, a psychological impact, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities around the corner. You just have to know where to look. And I'm going to stick close with you and figure out where some of these new opportunities are, because we're moving into a fascinating time of opportunity. Thank you very much, Alexander. You've been a fantastic guest. You've done one of the most succinct, beautiful at the start of this interview, the clarity of your explanation of the VC world was absolutely phenomenal. So I really want to thank you for that, and thank you for your further analysis as well. It's been really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks a lot, Steele. It's been a pleasure as well.
All right, thank you very much. All right, that's Alexander, all the way from Moscow, self-isolating there. You stay safe, sir. You don't breathe in any of that bad air, and we'll see you again at some point on Debt Nation.
Thank you very much.